Welcome to the Leadership with Vision podcast by Austin Gardner. For more information and resources, visit worldevangelism.net.
Well, I'm glad to be here with you on Leadership with Vision. I am in Lima, Peru, actually in the south side of the city in a place called Villa El Salvador. And I'm here with missionary Joe Kotvas, and he is in charge of and directs Fata Ministries. And so we're going to be interviewing him a couple of times to let you get an idea of what God's doing here in this great ministry. Won't you introduce somebody to yourself, Joe? Tell who you are, your wife, your kids, whatever.
Hi, my name is Joe Kotvas. As Pastor Austin said, I am a missionary here in Peru, South America, and beyond. I have a wife, her name is Lisa, and we have 10 children, last time I counted, and 2 grandchildren, one on the way. One of my sons is now a missionary here working with us. Another one just graduated Bible college, and so we're excited about what the Lord's doing in our family. We've been here in Peru for 17 years, serving this community, the community of the deaf, as well as the hearing. And God has done a lot of great things through this.
Well, tell us a little bit of history. I think last night you announced that like 6 missionaries out of your church had gone out. Could you tell about that?
Yeah, the ministry was started probably about 46 years ago. A missionary by the name of Vernon Miller, who was deaf, he came to Peru to reach the deaf. He was in a missions conference in the United States in his home church, and he saw all the hearing people going out as missionaries. And then he went up to his pastor and said, "Why can't I go out as a missionary?" And his pastor, instead of saying, "No, because you're deaf, you're limited," his pastor took him under his wing and personally discipled and trained him. And then that church sent him out as a missionary here to Peru, South America. Well, when he came down here, he had to learn Spanish and he had to learn the Peruvian Sign Language. Unfortunately, there was no Peruvian Sign Language to speak of. He tried to start a church for the deaf at least 3 times, and every time it failed because the deaf were hiding. They were the community, the people, their own families discounted them, and so they were too afraid, and they didn't have any language skills. So while he was frustrated with that, he was in the home of another missionary here in Peru, and they were praying, and while they were praying, this is a true story, while they were praying, a knock came to the door of the missionary's house, and a lady was there and said, "Hey, missionary, I've got a woman that's got 2 deaf children, and she doesn't know what to do with them. Can you help us?" And so from that, God's miraculous intervention, they started a school, which they called the Ephata School, which Ephata comes from Mark chapter 7, verse 34, where Jesus said to the deaf man, Ephata in our English Bibles. The transliteration to Spanish is Ephata, and it means be open. So he started the Ephata School for the Deaf here in Peru, and they started in a house. The missionary actually lived in that house. The hearing missionary, moved out of the house so the deaf missionary could have the house for a school. Then he moved to 2 other bigger houses in a town called Josica. And then finally in 1971, they were donated a piece of property in Villa El Salvador, which was nothing but a desert. And through the collaboration of churches in the United States and his home church and various mission organizations, they were able to build the Ephata complex and ministry. And then in 1977, they started their own deaf church here at Ephata Baptist Ministries. And from there, the church continued to grow. And then in 1999, my family and I moved down here to help the missionary, and we've been going ever since.
Now, we never got to the 6 missionaries.
Oh, thank you. Ephata Ministries, we also train men and women who wish to work with deaf people from all over the world. We train American missionaries, we train missionaries from other countries in South America, and we also, of course, train our own people. And so we have had, over the course of the time that I have been here, we have had several missionaries go out of our church that were trained and raised in our church. 6 of them. There's one in Ecuador, there's one in Argentina, there's one in Venezuela, there's one in Pucallpa here in Peru, there's one in Huancayo here in Peru, and we have another one in Ecuador that's working with deaf and hearing people and serving the Lord, and one in Cajamarca, excuse me.
How many of those guys were deaf?
One of them was deaf. There's another one in our Bible college that's deaf, that's training in his last year. And so there were other deaf pastors and deaf missionaries years ago under the former missionary, but unfortunately most of them are out of the ministry today for various reasons.
But you have seen these other people were members of your church, and so they came here, were part of the church, trained, and these 6 guys went out. That's
correct. They're members of our church. One of them works here with us, and then others are in other cities in Peru and then in other countries. Yes, they are members of Iglesia Bautista Ephata or Ephata Baptist Church, trained here, ordained here, and sent out from this ministry.
Okay. Now, your church has a hearing side and a deaf side. Would you explain that?
About 7 years ago, the Lord began to work in my heart. 8 years ago, actually, as our ministry, it was just a deaf-centric ministry. We just focused on deaf people and their families, but we really didn't do a good job focusing on the hearing family members of the deaf. And so the Lord just began to work on my heart. And in a conference in the States when I was on furlough, the Lord got a hold of me and said, "You are going to let the hearing people around you that are under the shadow of your steeple, so to speak, die and go to hell because you're just a missionary to the deaf." And not only that, there was an ethical issue because right next door to us was a hearing independent Baptist church. So for years we didn't even consider starting a hearing church here because of the fact that we had one right next door. But they have a unique, different philosophy of ministry than we do, and we decided that I'm not going to let the people that live around us die and go to hell because of some human ethical standard. I decided to go to all creatures, and so our deaf church started a hearing ministry. Greatest thing we ever did. And so now we have deaf and hearing working together. I have more hearing people involved with the deaf now. All our staff are fluent in Peruvian Sign Language. And so there are more people getting trained, more interpreters being developed, because now the hearing can see the need and can be involved in it. And the deaf and the hearing work together on many, many projects. So it's been a tremendous blessing. In fact, the hearing side of the ministry has grown tremendously in comparison to the deaf side. But that is literally a demographic situation that was bound to happen.
Well, approximately how many deaf people are here? Don't you have an orphanage?
Yes, our ministry not only has the churches, we also have a school for the deaf, which was what was originally established. And the deaf went over to the church next door until 1977 when they started their own church. Then we also have a small hearing school where staff people and our children go to school, and we teach that in English. And so there's a lot of Peruvian children here that speak fluent English on top of the sign language. Then we also have a pregnancy crisis center, and we have families that have had their children not aborted, families reconstructed and saved, and are members of our church through that ministry. We have a Bible Institute where we have deaf and hearing institutes where we teach the Bible, a more advanced level than, say, just a basic one-on-one discipleship. And then we also have our Bible College, a very small seminary where we really focus on teaching. The reason why we started it, because there are a lot of good seminaries here, but we wanted one that really emphasized and focused on people who are interested in working with the deaf. Because it's a mindset, it's a philosophy, and in many ways it's a little bit different working with the deaf, so we wanted to train people in that area. And so we also have a training center where we bring people in from the United States or from other countries, and they'll come and train with us, and then we'll send them back and better prepared to work with the deaf.
Well, let's start with how you got into deaf. How did you get trained to get into deaf ministry? Why would you be burdened to get in?
Well, back in 1984, I became a member of Trinity Baptist Church in Jacksonville, Florida, and they had a very large deaf ministry, a vibrant deaf ministry at the time, and an assistant pastor to the deaf.
And when you say large?
At that time, it was about 40, 50 deaf. And
so a large deaf ministry is 40 or 50?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, why deaf? Why deaf? Can you not get a deaf church running a couple hundred?
You can, but it takes a lot of logistic resources because you have to bust them in.
Well, what percentage of the community is deaf?
Probably about 5% of a community normally is deaf people, and they're dispersed throughout the community. And there are a lot of lower deaf people live in the lower classes, so they may not necessarily have their own mobility. They may not have to have their own cars. Their education level is a little bit less in many communities, and so you have to go out and reach those and bring them in.
So I'm not trying to be smart here, but does that mean rich people don't have deaf kids?
No, they do, and what they do, they invest in their kids, and their kids go to the better schools. And generally speaking, though, they're not the ones that are really looking for God. And so you really have to go out.
Why do you say they're not looking for God?
Because they don't need Him.
What do you mean they don't need Him?
In their mind, their world is a world based on concrete. And so much about faith is abstract. And so their parents have never really, if they take them to church, they sit there and they watch some guy flap his lips and they have no idea what's going on. So they have never developed a sense of a need for salvation or God.
Biblically, can we say that rich people aren't as interested?
I would say, yes. I would say biblically that rich people have a harder time.
Let's give them a Bible verse on that.
The Bible says that a rich man would be harder to go. It's like going through the eye of a needle for a rich man to go to heaven.
So it's not that you are against the rich people.
Oh, not at all.
We want the rich people to get saved, but it is in the Bible. Typically, the common people heard Him gladly. The rich people, they kind of tended to reject Him.
That's correct.
Okay, so how'd you get into it? So you went to Trinity.
Went to Trinity, and, this is a funny story, but one day I was sitting there one Sunday evening, and there was this really, really pretty lady interpreting. I mean, she was beautiful. And I asked a friend of mine who had his father was deaf, we had a friendship through Sunday school, and I asked him, I said, how can I get to know that girl? He says, well, she's the voice interpreter for the beginning sign language class that my father teaches in training union on Sunday night. Well, I said, I'll be there next Sunday night. And so I went next Sunday night to the beginning sign language class and went early and got a seat right next to where I figured the voice interpreter would sit. Well, as the people started filing in, an older lady came in and sat down in that chair. And I almost went to her and said, that's the seat for the voice interpreter. Well, I'm glad I didn't do that. I'm glad I kept my mouth shut. And
that'd be unusual for you, wouldn't it, Joe?
Well, nah. I do have some sense of prudence here and there. But
for those of you who don't know, Joe is the guy that used to laugh so loud he could bring entire stadiums to their feet.
That's true.
Yeah.
Those were the days. Anyways, so it's hard to get people to take you seriously when you got that side of you too, though. That's the only bad thing.
I don't think so. You're doing great.
So she starts voice interpreting for the deaf teacher, and he made the class so interesting. I almost lost. What happened was they changed semesters. It was a new semester, so they had changed voice interpreters. She was done with her college requirement, so the other lady was doing the voice interpreting. But I fell in love with the man who was teaching the sign language. He's a wonderful deaf man, just an incredible, humble, just a good man. And his name was William Robinson. He passed away when he was 56, but he was a great man, and we became great friends. And I just fell in love with. And what I did not realize at Trinity is they have a separate service for the deaf on Sunday mornings at that time. And I'm like, every Sunday morning I'm in the auditorium, and it never hit me that the deaf weren't there on Sunday mornings, because that's where the rescue mission people would sit on Sunday morning. And on Sunday night and Wednesday night, the deaf would sit there. But it just didn't click. You see something every day and it just doesn't click. Then one day somebody, as I was in the sign language class, they invited me to deaf church on Sunday morning. I said, deaf church? What's that? So that's where the pastor to the deaf teaches the deaf or preaches to the deaf. So I went to deaf church the next Sunday morning, and it was all she wrote for me. The deaf pastor was so animated. I watched him, and his hands, his whole affect came alive. And the deaf were responding, and they were learning. And I said, I've got to be a part of this. And so, that girl that I was interested in, she was a part of the deaf ministry, of course, but that never went anywhere. But it was where I found my wife, and so I'm very grateful for that. But one day I'm out on visitation with the deaf pastor, and we became very close friends. And I think that's one of the things that helped me to really love the deaf, was because I decided I had a tendency, I've always had a tendency to connect with older men that I thought were doing something for God, and I wanted to be around them. I forced myself upon them so I could learn from them. And so we became close friends. And one day we went on visitation, and I'm watching him as he's driving. He has a stick shift, and he's spelling words. I'm like, Brother Steve, what are you doing? He says, I'm spelling the street signs. He said, that's how I keep my fingers limber. That's how I keep my finger spelling well. And it just enamored me. So we stopped by this lady's house, this deaf lady. He knocks on the door, and you could see that she's in there moving around, but she can't hear him knocking on the door. And she didn't have a doorbell that had a light, or the bulb was burnt. I don't know. But most deaf people have doorbells. When you push the doorbell, a light flashes in the house. And so she didn't have one of those. And so he's pounding on the door, and she's not responding. All of a sudden, now you have to understand, at this time, Brother Houghton, his name was Steve Houghton. He's a tremendous man of God. He works in St. Augustine, Florida right now. He was a bit on the portly side. And this portly, stately-looking, master degree pastor starts jumping up and down on the patio of this wood frame home. Boom, boom, boom. And I'm standing there looking at this saying, what in the world have I got myself in? And the lady immediately responded, came to the door, and we sat out on the porch, and he's talking with her, and they're just signing away, and I'm like, I have no clue what they're saying. And I said, I'm going to learn this language. And I did. And I just fell in love with the deaf ministry and its uniquenesses. And so that's how the Lord got me into the deaf ministry. And
what preparation did you have as far as studying? Didn't you tell me you took a course?
Right. Once I was in deaf ministry, I then took courses at Trinity Baptist College that were related to establishing a deaf ministry in sign language. So I did specific coursework in deaf ministry, and then I just sat at the feet of my mentor for years. Okay.
Now, before we'll close out here in about 2 or 3 minutes, but if somebody wanted more information about your ministry, you are you're greatly used in social media. You're out there a lot, right?
No, I'm not. But I do have a good website.
Okay, well, tell us about your website.
It's efata.org, EFATA.org, efata.org. or Kotvas.com. That's my family site where you can read a little bit about our
How you
family.
spell Kotvas?
It's KOTV as in Victor AS.com, KOTVAS.com, and at Fatha.org. At Fatha.org, you can read whatever updates I put out there at the blog. You can see pictures. You can see the whole ministry. It's in English and Spanish, so if you want to look at it in the Spanish side, when you go to the front page, you click on English or Spanish, it'll take you right to that.
And you also wrote a book.
I did. It's called Into the Silence. It's a perspective and plan for reaching the deaf around the world. You can access it at lulu.com. Lulu.com is a self-publishing site. If you go to lulu.com and do a search for Into the Silence by my name, Joe Kotvas, author, it will come up. You can either order the book itself or download it in PDF file form. It's in English and in Spanish.
And Lord willing, we'll put a link on there, and Nate will get us a link so that you can just click on it right here where you got the podcast, and it will take you there. But we're going to take you to a lot more stuff about what's going on with deaf people, and I want Brother Jeff to share his excitement about getting the gospel out to deaf people. But before we leave this session, we're really talking about the ministry here at Afata. And so you have sent out 6 missionaries that were members of your church. You've trained numerous others. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And right now, would this be in the Spanish world? This would probably be the largest Spanish deaf ministry in the Spanish world, or not?
To my knowledge, yes.
Okay.
To my knowledge.
Okay, and you have like 80 people live here on campus, correct?
That's correct.
Would you kind of give us what's that mean?
Well, we have of course we have a residential school for the deaf, and it functions and operates as an orphanage as well. So we have about 20 some odd deaf children that live here, 25 deaf children that live here during the week, during the school year, and we have about 5 or 6 that are here all the time because they're either orphaned, abandoned, or have no one to care for them. And they live here with us. The government sends us deaf children. And then we have our staff, our pastoral staff that lives on campus. And so between the deaf children that live here, the pastoral staff and maintenance staff that live here, we have about 80 people that live here.
And how much land do we have here?
We have about an acre.
So about an acre of land, and 80 people live here on this acre. And also it is the home for the church.
That's correct.
The school.
The church, the school, the Pregnancy Crisis Center, the seminary, the institute. We have workshops. We have a carpentry workshop and a sewing workshop. Apartments for dormitories for the seminary students, dormitories for the deaf children. We have about 40 some odd children that actually stay here during the week. It wasn't 20. 20 is when there's no school, 40 when there's school.
Okay, now take a minute and challenge a young person, not about deaf ministry, but about Afata. There's a 18-year-old young man or woman, and they don't know what they're going to do with their life, and they're looking for a place to go into ministry, and should they consider Afata?
I believe Afata has the most complete, more bang for your buck in one location than many ministries out there. Why? Because you have so many multifaceted ministries here. If you want to work with hearing people, we have an aggressive hearing ministry. If you want to work with deaf people, we have an aggressive deaf ministry. If you want to work in an educative ministry, we have school for deaf and a school for hearing where we need teachers to come down and help teach. We desire to have an English as a second language program. We just don't have the teacher for it. We have, if you like to work with orphans, we have the orphanage ministry. If you want to work with special needs, we have that. There is not a certain type of ministry that you can think of. We're starting up ministry to law enforcement and military. We're starting up ministry to drug addicted and people. I mean, there's just a lot going on in a small place. And for a young person who wants to get, and we're in the city, but we're not in the city. We're out on the south end of the city in a fairly poor municipality. But we have ministries in the jungle. We have ministries in the mountains. So if any type of ministry that you can think of, you say, I'd like to get some training and then get some cross training. This would be a great ministry to do that with. And we've had people come for 2 weeks, 3 months, 6 months who come here. They get trained in the specific area that they want. We have short-term missionaries that have been here. One young lady's been here now. This is her 3rd year teaching in our school. It'll be her last year. So we need Christian school teachers. And those who are even trained to work in special needs, with deaf children, to come and teach in our deaf school. So if you want to teach in a deaf school, we can do that for you. If you want to teach in a hearing school, we can do that for you. If you want to work with pregnancy crisis situations, we can do that for you. If you want to just work on, be a soul winner and work in discipling and training people through a church ministry, we can do that for you. If you're a carpenter and you want to train other young people to have a skill to use and to go out and minister with, we have that. I cannot think of what area that you could plug yourself into that you would not learn something and cross-learn something else. Everyone who comes here learns Peruvian Sign Language. Peruvian Sign Language is 70% very similar to American Sign Language. And how that developed was because when the missionary came down, the missionary himself had to develop their language because they didn't have enough of it. And so ministry opportunities abound here at Ephatha Ministries. And so as you can do as much as you want, and we hope you wouldn't want to do as little as you want, but there's just all kinds of opportunity here.
Well, a young single girl, is there a place she can come, be secure, and have a place to stay and work?
Right. At Ephatha Ministries, we have a lot of young single ladies that work here with us. We have a walled complex. It's got a electric fence around it, and it's a very secure in the complex, and it's a very nice complex. We try to make it as nice as possible on the inside, so that when you're inside, you don't think you're in a barren wasteland. And we have dormitories for you to live in. Your needs and you would only have to bring the money that you would need to maintain yourself and to help you have a little to put into the ministry. And really, it's a great place for a single young lady to come for a year or two even before if she has no plans of getting married right away, to get some great experience.
What kind of cost would how much money would she need?
I always recommend that a single young lady comes down with $500 a month. That gives her $200 a month to help put into the work, and $300 a month for her personal needs. If she's going to do a lot of traveling, or she wants to have more personal mobility, then she's going to need more than that, $1,000 a month. But $500 a month is enough for a young lady to live here comfortably, minister, work, and have money to invest in ministry, and have money to take care of her personal needs.
All right. And if somebody was interested in this, how would they get in touch with you?
They would contact, if it's a young lady, ask them to contact my wife, Lisa. And you can contact her at lkotvas@ephatha.org. That's L and our last name, Kotvas, at ephatha.org. If you're a young man, just contact me, jkotvas@ephatha.org. My first initial last name at ephatha.org.
All right. Well, I hope you've enjoyed listening to Brother Joe Kotvas explain the ministry here in Lima, Peru. I almost said Arequipa, Ephatha Ministries. He will be back with us next week to explain to us about doing ministry for deaf people in the United States. And I think that's probably what we'll focus on a little bit, and maybe overseas. If not, we'll do a third podcast. But I hope you'll pray for him. I hope you'll look up his ministry. We thank you for listening, and God bless you.
You've been listening to Leadership with Vision by Austin Gardner. Visit worldevangelism.net to discover more podcasts and useful articles.